Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. On May 19th, 2021, at precisely 3:42 a.m., a 911 dispatcher picked up a call from an apartment in East Harlem. There was no voice, no words, just faint, raspy breathing. Then, a sharp sound, something blunt hitting tile, and silence. When NYPD officers forced open the door to Unit 4B less than 10 minutes later, what they walked into was not a burglary in progress or a domestic dispute. It was a blood-soaked crime scene. The woman found inside was later identified as 27-year-old Elena Hardy. She was alone, fully clothed, lying motionless near the kitchen threshold. First responders tried CPR, but it was clear from the beginning she hadn't made it. The ME's office would later report 18 stab wounds, concentrated in the chest and neck area. Most had clean entry paths, deep, targeted. She hadn't moved after collapsing. No defensive wounds. The layout of the apartment told a lot without saying anything. Front door locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. But the window beside the kitchenette, a narrow frame leading to the old fire escape, was slightly open. On the sill, investigators found a damp partial footprint and what looked like smeared mud. The path from the window to the kitchen showed faint drag marks in the dust on the wooden floor. There was no robbery. Her phone remained charging on the kitchen counter. Her handbag still had credit cards, ID, and $40 in cash. Her laptop sat closed, untouched. The room wasn't ransacked, just fractured. A table lamp was turned over, and a notebook lay face down on the carpet. It didn't look like chaos. It looked like someone had moved fast, deliberate. Her body was positioned near the bar-height table. She had collapsed facing the living room, suggesting the attack came from behind. The knife used, standard kitchen blade, stainless steel, had been placed in the sink basin, still wet, cleaned poorly. On the edge of the blade, Tex recovered a single short strand of hair and traces of diluted blood. Later that day, a detective on the scene glanced at a small envelope on her dining table. It was labeled in black ink, Protective Order, Feb 14. Inside was a packet of court documents, a restraining order issued by a Manhattan judge against an individual named Fernando Munera. 3 pages. Attached, her handwritten affidavit stating repeated harassment, unwanted calls, surveillance, and an incident where she was physically cornered in her stairwell 2 floors below. The document wasn't buried. It wasn't hidden in a drawer. It had been kept in plain sight. Taped to the envelope was a yellow sticky note with 5 simple words. Keep this by the door. Outside the apartment, detectives began knocking on doors. One neighbor reported hearing a thud around 3 a.m. Another recalled hearing footsteps on the fire escape around the same time. No one reported seeing a struggle or hearing screams. But just across the alley, a residential building had a rooftop security camera. Low quality, not meant for criminal surveillance. Still, when the footage was reviewed, a single frame showed a tall figure in a hooded sweatshirt descending from the fire escape at exactly 2:57 a.m. The person moved quickly and with purpose, jumping the last few steps, then disappearing into the alley behind the dumpsters. The surveillance system inside Elena's own building, more modern, clearer, and facing all entryways, had been non-functional for weeks. The building manager confirmed a maintenance order had been submitted but never fulfilled. The last recorded footage was from early April. That data gap became the first of many problems. Police began their victimology profile. Elena Hardy, female, 27, born in Flagstaff, Arizona. Moved to New York in 2019 for graduate school. Enrolled in the physician assistant program at Hunter College. Clean academic record. No known enemies. No history of substance use or mental illness. Worked part-time at a Midtown urgent care clinic. Rent paid on time. Social media minimal and locked down. Friends described her as kind, reserved, driven. She was close with her mother, who still lived in Arizona. The two spoke daily. Elena was set to graduate within the next year and had recently begun looking for job placements in community clinics. Her mother was the first to raise alarm. At 8:14 a.m. on May 19th, she called the precinct, stating she hadn't been able to reach her daughter since the previous night. A wellness check was initiated. By then, Elena was already dead. Digital forensics pulled from her phone and cloud account painted a clearer picture. In the weeks leading up to the murder, Elena had received multiple text messages from unknown numbers. The messages were always brief, sometimes threatening, often obsessive. The phone numbers were masked, routed through anonymous VoIP services. A few were short, haunting. "You don't belong here. I see you. You never left my head." The messages ramped up around late April. She'd reported the initial wave to her university counselor, who suggested increasing personal safety, but noted that anonymous texting was hard to trace. Detectives reviewed data logs from the phone's motion sensor. Between 2:50 a.m. and 3:10 a.m., the phone detected rapid motion followed by sudden inactivity. The screen lit up once at 3:01, possibly triggered by facial recognition or a hand wave. It went dark permanently at 3:06. One additional clue emerged from the forensic sweep. An old app installed on her phone, disguised as a calendar utility, had been flagged for irregular access permissions. It allowed remote camera access and location tracking. The app had been installed over 3 months earlier. That discovery opened a new direction. A digital stalker. Likely someone close. Someone with access. Someone with reason. But for now, Elena's story remained fragmented. The only thing certain was that she had seen this coming. She had documented her fears. She had named a person. She had taken it to court. And none of it stopped what happened inside apartment 4B. By the end of day one, the NYPD had classified the case as a domestic homicide with evidence of premeditation and unlawful surveillance. The suspect named in the protective order, Fernando Munera, had not been located. A citywide alert was issued. No press release, no public detail. The department was holding everything close, for now. The manila folder found on Elena Hardy's table was not a keepsake. It was a warning, one she had made official 3 months before she died. Inside it was a court-issued temporary order of protection filed under New York Family Court Case, number 218 F241. The respondent name was Fernando Munera. At the time, Elena described him as increasingly erratic, controlling, and dangerous, stating that continued contact poses a threat to her personal safety and emotional well-being. Detectives reviewing the protective order timeline noted that the request had been submitted on February 11, 2021, following an incident that occurred inside the stairwell of her apartment building. Elena alleged that Munera had blocked her descent between floors 3 and 2, refusing to let her pass unless she agreed to speak with him one last time. She managed to slip by, but only after he grabbed her wrist. The interaction was witnessed by a delivery driver who later confirmed to NYPD that the man looked like he wasn't going to let her go. 3 days later, a judge signed off on a temporary order, requiring Munera to stay at least 300 feet away from Elena, her residence, her school, and her workplace. He was also prohibited from making any contact by phone, text, email, or social media. The order was served in person on February 15th. This was the start of what investigators would later refer to as the paper shield phase, a period where legal protection existed in theory, but enforcement was essentially non-existent. NYPD case logs revealed that after the restraining order was issued, there had been 2 separate 311 calls placed by Elena, both reporting suspected surveillance. In one instance, she told the operator that she had seen the same man parked across the street in the same car 4 days in a row. Each time, officers did a drive-by. No arrest was made. No follow-up documented. Her phone records supported the concern. Detectives from NYPD's Cyber Intelligence Unit pulled a partial report from her carrier and found at least 12 unknown numbers that had contacted Elena between February 22 and March 10th. Most were VoIP-based, routed through burner apps like TextNow or Hushed. All were untraceable to a physical subscriber ID. Investigators flagged a few messages as particularly concerning. "You left the back window open again." "Library till 9? I saw you walk home." "Can't leave what's unfinished." Digital forensics also discovered a low-grade surveillance app hidden within Elena's phone, disguised as a calendar utility. The app, called Time Map Planner, had camera, microphone, and GPS permissions, excessive for its claimed function. It had been installed on January 30th. Its data logs indicated periodic check-ins, even after the restraining order was active. Time Map Planner was not a common app. Cyber intelligence traced its distribution to a third-party APK website based in Eastern Europe. It was never available through the App Store or Google Play. Its presence on Elena's phone implied either an intentional download or, more likely, unauthorized installation via physical access. Detectives noted that the app's initial permissions had been accepted within 30 seconds of installation, a strong indicator that it was installed while the phone was unlocked. The forensic takeaway: someone who knew Elena had installed this app and had access to her device while it was unlocked, possibly during the time they were still in contact. This prompted detectives to look deeper into Munera's digital footprint. They obtained a subpoena for his known email accounts and associated IP addresses. What came back was limited. His activity on public platforms had decreased substantially after February, but investigators discovered one IP address registered to a residential broadband line in Queens that had accessed both Elena's public LinkedIn profile and a login portal to the Hunter College student dashboard. Both accesses occurred at odd hours, 2:03 a.m. and 3:11 a.m., respectively. Further search warrants were issued for university systems. Logs confirmed that someone had attempted to reset Elena's student portal password 3 times in March. The IP address from Queens matched. The attempts failed. No immediate charges could be filed based solely on these digital anomalies, but the pattern was building: a subject with prior access, known behavioral escalation, legal restrictions in place, and a recurring digital presence despite formal prohibition. Meanwhile, detectives reviewed building maintenance logs. A work order to fix the security system of Elena's building had been submitted on April 5th. It was marked incomplete for over 6 weeks. That camera, the one that could have shown a face descending the fire escape, had remained dark through every night leading up to her murder. The unit was disconnected, its hard drive outdated and never backed up. During internal discussions, one lead detective made a short observation: the system was broken in all the ways it mattered. That's not an opinion. That's just procedural fact. Her family, meanwhile, began cooperating with investigators. Elena's mother provided a list of her daughter's recent concerns. They included: someone has been in my hallway again. He said he wasn't done. I bought new locks, but I still don't feel safe. Elena had attempted to move to a different apartment in April, but the application stalled due to income documentation delays. She told a friend via text that she was planning to leave New York by the end of summer if things didn't improve. In towns like Duluth, murders aren't just crimes. They tear at the fabric of a quiet community. In cities like New York, the tearing is quieter, but it cuts just the same. The forensic picture now had enough lines drawn to raise one conclusion: this wasn't about chance, nor was it sudden. The approach had been gradual, the surveillance deliberate. The digital trail pointed to someone who'd refused to let go. And now police were one step closer to confirming it. By the third day of the investigation, NYPD's forensic data team began consolidating information from Elena Hardy's digital ecosystem: her phone, cloud backups, GPS logs, Wi-Fi connections, and wearable devices. What they were looking for wasn't just location. They were building a timeline that placed a human body, not just a signal, inside her apartment at the exact hour her life ended. Elena's phone, an iPhone XR, had health app background data that confirmed she was physically active until approximately 2:46 a.m. on May 19, 2021. Step count, heart rate, and barometer data showed movement from her bedroom to the kitchen, then a sharp drop. Her phone remained stationary until 3:06 a.m., when the gyroscope registered an abrupt tilt, likely the moment it was knocked or dropped. After that, it never moved again. At the same time, a second device, her Apple Watch, stopped syncing. That signal ended at 2:58 a.m. The timestamp was critical. It narrowed the suspected window of death to under 10 minutes. Detectives then turned their attention to environmental data from surrounding infrastructure. Cell tower triangulation placed a secondary phone, not registered to Elena, within a 90-foot radius of her building between 2:40 and 3:05 a.m. on the night of the murder. That phone pinged 3 towers, one in East Harlem, another near 2nd Avenue, and a third closer to East 117th. The sequence confirmed movement from north to south, directly toward her block, then a complete stop during the murder window. This second phone was a prepaid device with no subscriber information, but records showed that it had connected multiple times in prior weeks to Wi-Fi networks in the immediate vicinity of Elena's building. Once at a coffee shop across the street, another time in the residential lobby. Data patterns showed that it was often nearby, rarely farther than one city block. It wasn't just following her, it was tracking her movements precisely. Detectives used a narrowband Bluetooth scan to determine whether that second phone had ever come close enough to pair or interfere with Elena's own devices. It had, twice. On April 23rd and May 3rd, between 8 and 9 p.m., her phone registered a nearby device named Galaxy 21X in its handshake log, a record of Bluetooth-enabled devices within 30 feet. That phone name matched the make and model of the burner phone detected on cell tower logs. Elena never owned a Samsung. This was someone else's presence in her proximity, close enough to connect, unnoticed. While the data provided movement, detectives needed a visual anchor. That came from MTA security logs. Through a warrant, NYPD obtained MetroCard swipe data for nearby subway stations. At 1:33 a.m. on May 19th, someone used a pay-per-ride MetroCard at the 116th Street station, entering the downtown platform. The MTA camera captured a single figure, male, hooded, jeans, hands in pockets, entering and exiting within 3 minutes. He never boarded a train. Instead, he exited, crossed the street, and vanished out of frame. Digital timestamps later aligned with building footage from the neighboring rooftop. That same silhouette appeared climbing down the fire escape 24 minutes later. This alignment formed the first hard timeline. A burner phone, with matching Bluetooth and tower pings, was near Elena's residence. The figure tied to that phone showed up on camera near the building, and the phone was still present during the time of death. When forensic analysts overlaid the entire sequence, it was clean. Too clean. The lead investigator wrote in his summary memo, "The data aligned too cleanly." Sometimes that's the problem, because every movement matched the outline of someone who wasn't acting impulsively. The route to the apartment, the timing, the use of fire escape instead of the main door, the decision to carry no identifiable device and leave no DNA other than a single strand of hair. Whoever this was had planned for every variable, except the full scope of digital residue left behind. Later that week, NYPD's Data Crimes Division traced Wi-Fi handshakes from the burner phone to a commercial laundromat 5 blocks north of Elena's apartment. The phone had connected to the shop's free Wi-Fi 7 times in May alone. Police obtained the store's DVR, low-quality, audio-disabled, but it offered a pattern. On May 12th at 11:48 a.m., a man entered wearing a dark gray hoodie. He never used the machines. He stood near the front window for almost 20 minutes, then left without saying a word. Detectives pulled a still frame and flagged the image. A witness later identified him as someone who looked familiar from the building, but couldn't name him. No positive ID was made that week, but the image was preserved. So was the burner number. So was the time pattern, converging into one forensic truth. Whoever had killed Elena had begun mapping her life weeks earlier, quietly, repeatedly. In cities like New York, the margins of privacy are razor thin. The same systems that track criminal activity are often the ones criminals manipulate first. And for Elena, the last 6 weeks of her life were monitored in ways even she didn't fully detect. The knife recovered from the sink in Elena Hardy's apartment was an 8-inch stainless steel chef's blade, standard issue, part of a mid-range kitchen set, identical to 5 others still on the block by her stove. Its handle was textured polymer, worn from regular use. The blade was bent, slightly warped at the tip. It had been rinsed under water, poorly. When the NYPD crime lab processed it, technicians found diluted traces of blood in the serrated edge closest to the hilt. Presumptive tests confirmed it belonged to the victim. But more important than the blood was what was found embedded near the groove between blade and handle. A single epithelial cell fragment, human, non-matching. Partial mitochondrial DNA was recovered and flagged for comparison. On the outside of the handle, lab technicians identified a mix of skin oil, trace fabric particles, and one dark short strand of hair, unrooted but still viable. The hair was lifted, isolated, and cataloged as Exhibit 14B. It didn't match the victim. These findings represented the first potential biological contact between the suspect and the crime scene. Separately, latent prints were recovered from the stainless steel faucet. Most matched Elena. One print, partial, left ring finger, was isolated from the underside of the fixture. It was smudged but distinct enough to warrant a cross-check through NY state criminal records. No immediate match came back. Swabs taken from the sink basin revealed diluted blood residue. Microscopic spatter was present on the countertop backsplash. 5 small arcs, less than a millimeter in width. Directionality indicated the victim was struck while standing, consistent with the earlier analysis of body position. Beyond the sink, another area drew attention: the fridge door handle. Forensics found a secondary partial print there, consistent with a right-handed individual. This print did not belong to Elena. It also did not match the unknown latent recovered from the faucet. Investigators now had 2 distinct prints unaccounted for. One detail stood out in the lab report. The print on the faucet showed pressure in a downward swipe, a motion consistent with turning off the water forcefully. The water had been shut off midstream. That matched eyewitness statements from building maintenance, who reported the sound of running water during the early morning hours of May 19th. One tenant recalled hearing it stop suddenly, all at once, shortly before emergency personnel arrived. Crime scene techs reprocessed the drain trap under the sink. Filter sludge collected from the U-bin contained microscopic fragments of latex, possibly from gloves. The gloves weren't recovered. No packaging was found on site. The trace presence was small, 3 specks less than 0.3 mm each, but significant. Meanwhile, the knife block contained 5 knives. One slot was empty. The knife used was consistent in size and angle with the missing unit. Fingerprint powder testing on the remaining knives showed only Elena's prints. None of the others were disturbed. Crime scene photographs were reviewed again. In one wide-angle image just behind the stove, a faint boot scuff was visible on the linoleum floor. It had been missed in the initial pass. Upon enhancement, it showed a partial tread pattern. Forensic footwear specialists later matched it to a common urban utility boot sold under multiple brands. Investigators noted that this scuff was not present during a prior maintenance visit recorded 2 weeks earlier. That gave it a high probability of relevance. At the ME's office, the full autopsy confirmed 18 stab wounds, 14 of which were fatal independently. Most entered at downward angles, clean insertions, deliberate, forceful. None hit bone, no hesitation marks. One wound punctured the left lung and pericardial sac, likely the final blow. Toxicology returned negative. No signs of drug use, sedation, or alcohol. Time of death was adjusted to approximately 2:52 a.m., matching both the Apple Watch signal loss and the building's Wi-Fi drop-off. By this point in the investigation, the forensic picture was no longer a rough outline. It was layered. There was a clear point of entry: the fire escape, a single weapon from the victim's own kitchen. Gloves, possibly used, not recovered. DNA, partial but present, collected from the knife and bathroom. 2 distinct unknown fingerprints, both placed after the attack. Hair, non-matching, found near the weapon, and a single boot scuff that placed someone between the sink and the stove. This wasn't about random violence. It wasn't frenzied. The killer hadn't brought a weapon. He used what was available, operated quickly, cleaned poorly, and exited without detection. But he left behind more than he intended. There's a saying in forensic work: silence doesn't mean clean, it means missed, until you look closer. By day 6 of the investigation, detectives had a partial DNA profile, 2 latent fingerprints, 1 unknown hair sample, and a viable time of death window, but no confirmed suspect. Physical evidence alone wasn't enough. What they needed next was contradiction. Someone close enough to speak, but careless enough to misstep. They started with proximity. NYPD canvassed the building again, this time focusing on 3rd and 4th floor tenants with views of the fire escape or hallway. A neighbor 2 doors down stated she'd seen a man loitering near the stairwell 2 nights before the murder. He wasn't carrying anything, just leaning against the rail, hood up, unmoving. She didn't think much of it at the time. But when shown the laundromat still from Chapter 3, she paused before saying, "That's the guy. Same face. No name." But now there was a second confirmation. The interview process escalated. Elena's classmates were called in. One student, a close project partner, mentioned Elena had expressed concern about someone tracking her. Not just physically, but digitally. She once said, "I think he's still in my phone, even after I blocked everything." She didn't say who he was, but the implication was clear. Elena had also contacted campus security once in March, asking if any outside parties had requested access to student files or login records. The report was noted but not escalated. In hindsight, it should have been. Investigators pulled a list of known acquaintances. One name matched the family court order: Fernando Munera. The order had expired May 17th, just 2 days before the attack. That wasn't coincidence. That was timing. Detectives tracked Munera's last known address, a sublet room in Queens, and attempted contact. He wasn't there. The landlord said he'd vacated 3 weeks prior, left no forwarding info, but 2 residents confirmed they'd seen him return briefly after May 19th. Only once. He stayed for half a night, then left in a rush. Meanwhile, phone records linked to the burner device recovered in Chapter 3 showed usage near a Bronx motel on May 23rd. Room logs confirmed a guest had checked in under a false name matching the initials FM. The ID was fake, but the credit card was valid, prepaid, loaded with $40. Enough for 2 nights. Surveillance footage from the front desk camera was grainy, but clear enough to establish the man's face. It matched the rooftop camera from Elena's alley. The scuff pattern from the boot found in her kitchen also matched the footwear seen on this same figure during his Bronx motel exit. Everything was converging. Timeline, device, location, print, now behavior. When finally picked up for questioning on May 23rd, the suspect provided a brief alibi. "I was out of town, upstate, with a friend." No friend was named, no destination provided, no proof offered. Detectives noted his calm but also his avoidance. He didn't ask how Elena had died. He didn't deny knowing her. He didn't deny the protective order. He only asked one thing: "Am I under arrest?" He wasn't, not yet. At this stage, the case had no confession, no eyewitness to the act itself, but it had proximity, motive, pattern of escalation, and mounting forensic traces that narrowed the net. The detectives weren't trying to provoke emotion. They were testing gaps in memory, gaps in story. Because people under pressure don't always lie. They just forget which parts they already told. The case was shifting from forensic assembly to psychological pressure, and the man at the table wasn't slipping. Not yet. But they only needed one inconsistency. By May 24, 2021, 9 days after the murder of Elena Hardy, the NYPD Major Case Squad finalized their initial evidence summary for submission to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. At this stage, the case was still categorized as a non-custodial investigation. No formal charges filed. But the cumulative weight of evidence had reached a threshold where prosecutorial strategy could begin. The package submitted included a forensic timeline, physical evidence breakdown, and supplemental witness statements. Among the items prioritized, partial mitochondrial DNA recovered from the murder weapon, non-matching the victim. A latent fingerprint from the faucet, unmatched in AFIS, but consistent with a person of interest known biometric range. Wi-Fi proximity data from a burner phone traced to a Bronx motel, later confirmed by surveillance. A boot tread impression from the victim's kitchen, consistent with footwear seen on video. The original restraining order against Fernando Munera expired just 2 days before the homicide. The DA's office reviewed the file within 24 hours. No arrest warrant was issued yet, but they approved a series of subpoenas and one court-authorized covert surveillance request. The target, Munera's digital activity post-questioning. During this phase, NYPD cyber units monitored anonymized accounts previously linked to burner device activity. One IP address reappeared on May 25th, logging into a VPN exit node used in prior attempts to access Elena Hardy's student portal. This showed continued engagement and intent. Parallel to that, detectives re-interviewed individuals in Munera's periphery, specifically 2 former roommates and a co-worker from a previous delivery job. The roommate confirmed seeing Munera return home late on May 19th, sweaty, silent, and carrying nothing. The co-worker, when asked if Munera had mentioned anyone named Elena, hesitated. He then admitted he said she thought she was smarter than him, that she needed to be reminded. That phrasing was included in the updated affidavit for probable cause. On May 26th, forensic analysts received a confirmatory DNA match from the hair strand recovered near the knife handle. Mitochondrial sequencing linked the sample to a known maternal line, belonging to the suspect's biological mother, whose genetic profile had been entered into a familial DNA database during a prior unrelated case. This did not confirm identity, but gave prosecutors enough to reclassify the evidence as high-probability biological association. That same day, a judge signed off on a full search warrant for Munera's prior residence, the room he had left in Queens. During execution, detectives recovered 2 flash drives and a spiral notebook. The flash drives contained login metadata matching the same VPN configurations used to stalk Elena's online accounts. The notebook, handwritten, included a short entry dated February 15th, the day the protection order was served. It read, "She thinks paper can stop consequence. Let her find out what real silence feels like." There was no longer ambiguity. The data, behavior, and language aligned. What prosecutors now had was not just circumstantial convergence, but procedural linkage. On May 27, 2021, NYPD formally issued a warrant for the arrest of Fernando Munera on charges of second-degree murder, criminal contempt, unlawful surveillance, and stalking in the first degree. He was apprehended later that evening at a shelter intake center in Brooklyn using a false name. He did not resist. He asked no questions, and he had shaved his head. It didn't change the DNA. Arresting officers found a single USB drive in his jacket pocket. Its contents were encrypted, but the file name was clear, ifsheleaves.zip. After the arrest of Fernando Munera on May 27, 2021, the case transitioned from fieldwork to courtroom readiness. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office began the process of pre-indictment strategy, managing what they knew would be a high-profile prosecution involving domestic violence, digital stalking, and a failed restraining order. Munera was held without bail. The charges filed included second-degree murder, first-degree stalking, and criminal contempt related to the court order issued earlier that year. His initial appearance lasted less than 10 minutes. He said nothing. His court-appointed attorney entered a not guilty plea on his behalf. The defense requested a psychological evaluation. Behind closed doors, prosecutors weren't concerned with his demeanor. They were focused on ensuring their timeline, forensics, and digital evidence aligned clearly enough to avoid procedural delays. The weapon, the DNA, the burner phone, and the hair sample all stood as independent but converging strands. But the prosecution's strongest leverage came from the USB drive recovered from Munera's jacket pocket at the time of his arrest. The drive was encrypted, but the file list was accessible. Metadata revealed a folder created just after the expiration of the protective order, May 17th. Its name, If She Leaves. Files inside included screen captures of Elena's apartment window from across the street, daily GPS logs, and a document labeled Last Routes. All items were submitted into evidence. A forensic expert confirmed the timestamps had not been altered. The defense leaned toward a mental defect defense early. The court ordered a psychological competency review. Munera was evaluated twice, first by a court psychologist, then by an independent expert. Neither found him legally insane. Both described him as calculating, with limited affect but intact logic. That meant trial was inevitable. Elena's mother, present at the first hearing, sat with her hands clasped. She gave no interviews. The family declined media contact. Prosecutors made no public statements beyond confirming the arrest and charges. While the court prepared, a coalition of victim advocacy groups began citing the case in campaigns urging stronger enforcement of restraining orders. For them, the pattern was familiar. A victim who did everything the system asked, and a system that hadn't moved fast enough. Inside the DA's office, the trial team began refining witness lists and sequence of presentation. First, the responding officers. Then, the digital analysts. Finally, the forensic lab director. Each would tie one element of planning, presence, and action to the defendant. There was no confession, but the facts were building a consistent picture of intent. As one prosecutor later put it, he didn't snap, he planned. And when he knew no one was watching, he moved. On January 24, 2024, nearly 3 years after the murder of Elena Hardy, the trial of Fernando Munera began in a Manhattan courtroom. The defendant was escorted in under heavy restraint. No media interaction, no emotion. He sat still at the defense table as prosecutors outlined what had already been established. Elena was not killed in a moment of rage. She was hunted, monitored, and ultimately executed by someone who believed she owed him silence. The prosecution relied on clean, chronological presentation. They didn't rehash emotion. They focused on verifiable fact. The protective order, the burner phone triangulated to the scene, the hair recovered from the murder weapon, the digital archive of surveillance logs created days before the attack. One exhibit, a folder labeled "If She Leaves," was opened on screen. It showed photos of Elena's window at night, saved GPS patterns of her daily walk, and a document with the title "Exit Options." A forensic technician testified that the contents had been modified hours after the protective order expired. The defense presented no alternate suspect and offered no counter evidence to the digital trail. Their only strategy was diminished responsibility. 2 court-approved psychologists rejected that claim. They described Munera as methodical, detached, and fully aware of the illegality of his actions. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. Fernando Munera was found guilty of second-degree murder, first-degree stalking, unlawful surveillance, and contempt of court. The sentencing judge addressed the defendant briefly before issuing a sentence of life in prison with a minimum of 40 years. No possibility of parole within that term. Elena's family did not speak during sentencing. They submitted a short statement read by the court officer. It ended with one line: "She did everything right, and still, she wasn't protected in time." The public response was swift. Advocacy groups used the case to highlight failures in restraining order enforcement. New York legislators introduced a proposal requiring mandatory electronic monitoring for high-risk domestic violence offenders with prior tech-based harassment. A bill later named in Elena's memory. No law reverses a loss like this, but consequences matter. Elena Hardy was 27. She reported the danger, she asked for space, she followed every rule available to her. In the end, what failed wasn't her judgment, it was the system's speed. Cases like this don't fade because of their violence. They stay because they expose the lag between warning and protection. And sometimes the loudest legacy is left by those who tried the hardest to live. End of case. There's a lesson I wish no one had to learn the way Elena did. Doing everything right doesn't always guarantee you'll be safe. But that doesn't mean we stop speaking up. If this story has shown anything, it's that silence only ever empowers the one causing harm. So to anyone watching, especially those feeling unseen or unheard, I want you to know, your life matters. You deserve to be protected, believed, and free. What are your thoughts on how the system handled Elena's case? Have you or someone you know faced something similar? Share where you're watching from or what this story made you feel. And if this video moved you or gave you something to think about, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps bring more true stories to light.